The words task force make you think of military, law enforcement. But I want to talk to you today a little bit about how that infrastructure really can be adopted by you and your building company to make your building company more effective, more efficient, and more profitable. Enjoy. How old are you going to be before you start to experience life like you want it? I want to tell you right now, whether you like it or not, there is a better way to do business. Hi everyone, welcome to the Business for Builders podcast. My name's Max, I'm your host. Welcome to you if you're in YouTube land. Good of you to stop by. Hopefully you're going to get some steak and potatoes out of this episode. As usual, like and subscribe, all that kind of good stuff. Get across to Business for Builders VIP on Facebook. There's a community starting to build there of general contractors, residential home builders, even subcontractors, and certainly some apprentices as well, which is encouraging because it's all about education. I think if you want to get in contact with me, got any questions, max@elitebusinessadvisory.com. If you want to chat with me about your business and how things are progressing, and if you've got any challenges, I'm happy to provide you a 30-minute complimentary coaching session, which is a little bit of strategic planning. So we'll have a listen to you about what your business is, how your business is doing, what you're doing well, maybe what you're not doing so well. So don't be shy. Get across there. Take me up on my offer because it could be something that's fairly life-changing for you, like it has been for some of my Elite Business Advisory coaching clients. Right. Today, I've got something a little bit tricky. General Contracting Task Force. It's funny, I love watching documentaries, history. I'm a bit of a history buff. I like to understand, where we came from. But what intrigues me a lot, and particularly around, law enforcement, military, anything, even restaurants, right? Anything with a good system that's got a good story to tell. I was telling someone, might have been today, that I love watching Gordon Ramsay's, Hell's Kitchen and things like that, or what is it, the kitchen's worst nightmare, or whatever it's called, where he goes in there, he sits there, he eats the food, it freaking sucks, and then he basically goes and tries to breathe life into the business and create new systems and processes and get rid of the ratbag humans and, put some good people in positions and things like that. And also John Taffer, who does bar rescue, same sort of process. He walks in there, scopes out the joint, figure out what they're not doing well, and then tries to implement, again, good systems, good people, different marketing promotions, things like that. So I'm really intrigued, especially when you start getting into, first responders, law enforcement, military, if you've been in that game, thank you for your service. I think it's really interesting for me when I sit there and I watch, one I'm watching on Paramount Plus at the moment called FBI True, I think. And, there's a lot of, it's a very similar format. So the show itself has got a very similar format, very much wash, rinse and repeat. So there's a template that they use to run the shows. Now, as you listen to, these let's call it retired FBI agents talking about what they had to do on certain cases 15, 20, 30 years ago, you start to see and get an understanding of the amount of human resource that's involved. And the next thing that really begs the question is, how do you keep those people trained up, accountable, and, really going in the right direction and working cohesively? And automatically I'm watching that and I'm intrigued because I think, imagine if we could have general contractors that run their business, similar to that. That'd be awesome. But what it does is that you're talking about decades, years and years and years of implementation and refinement around their systems. And, of course, there was always the, folks in politics or in military or in law enforcement that there is some corruption that goes on. And so, it's important that we understand that even those systems are not perfect in their execution, because there is an imperfect creature in there working the system, that human. And so we've got to have this balance of creating a task force. And it's interesting because depending on the type of case that these FBI agents are working on, they will determine the size of the task force that is required. And, it was interesting. I was watching one episode and they were talking about doing 150 raids all at the same time in this very small area. And, with 4 or 5 agents going out per raid, you can imagine the number of human resources. So that kind of operation, I mean, we just run a general contracting business. Folks, we should be able to get our shit together well enough to understand how to run a general contracting business properly. But you got to understand, a lot of these FBI agents come from a legal background. They come from an academic background. They're trained to use their minds. So they fit very much in with anywhere their systems, that academic attitude maps well, because they go, what's the system? Whereas for us builders, what we are not technically systemized, although we're very systemized in how we build houses, but we are not really systemized in business development. And this is really all I bang on about, because I'm not here to teach you how to mark out plates and knock walls up and, put trusses in. That's not what I'm here. You should know how to do that. Okay. So, it intrigued me because every time they talk about, we put a task force together, we assembled a task force. The task force that we used for this was that, and then you've got the micro task force like SWAT. They'll go in and do their job. You've got all of the forensic team that do their job, right? And so we're going to get into some of this, because as I'm watching this, I'm always in parallel. I'm like, what can I take away from this, even though it's a documentary? Can I use it as education that I can then pull out, and really paraphrase it or transpose it into builder language that I can use to really start to build the foundation stones and ultimately, my business to where I want it. So why am I using the task force analogy? Well, law enforcement task forces handle complex, multi-step, high-stakes operation, very similar to your construction company. If I talk to some of my mentors, in the construction business, they'll tell you there's millions of components that go into building a new home. And it's very complex, it's very demanding. Law enforcement, they use clear roles. Listen to this: clear roles, tight communication, coordinated execution, and defined chain of command. And, this is all of the stuff that we never get taught. And I thought I'd have a little crack at it today to at least knock the lid off of it. And so you can start to think about it, put a stone in your shoe, and you think, okay, I've got homes to build. I've got contracts to, I've got leads to get. I've got sales to make. I've got delivery to do, construction, and then a bit of after sales, a bit of post-construction as well. Like, what does my task force look like? And I would urge you to start considering that as you're driving down the road and this podcast ends. Start thinking about what does the task force look like that I need? And then we'll start, later on here, we'll get into org charts and things like that. General contractors or builders, we often run our businesses with no structure, and really no mission clarity. And you've heard me say before that we want to set that goal, whether it's a 12-month goal, 2-year goal, 5-year, 10, and then we want to start reverse engineering it into right back to where we are currently and go, right, what have I got to achieve this week or this month to help me on my way to achieve that overall goal or mission, right? Super important. I think having a task force, what it does is it creates a team environment. It brings discipline, organization, strategic thinking into your environment as a general contractor or a builder, right? So, okay, so the need for that end goal, what they would call in the military side of things, the mission objective, right? Every task force operation starts with a clear outcome. I often think I've watched a documentary on, chasing down Osama bin Laden, and that was a classic example where the mission was to get that guy, and again, they had to assemble a task force. They had a whole bunch of military, but they assembled a task force with all of the mechanics that go around it, like helicopters and, communications and, headquarters and things like that. They looked at their logistics and said, we're going to need this many guys. We're going to, in the field, we're going to need this many choppers. We're going to need this many, in the planning side of things. Like, they assembled the task force based on the end result or the mission objective. Without an end goal, chaos becomes the default operating system. See, when you're running from firefight to firefight, you're not actually thinking about the process. You're just focused on that issue and then that issue and then this issue, right? So what we have to be is very intention. We have to have high level of intention and be very proactive around selecting where we spend our next 5 minutes or an hour, making sure that we're getting the most out of that. Without right, the mission determines what roles are needed. So here you go. This is a little bit of strategic planning. When we talk about quarterly strategic planning, we talk about strategic planning as an overall process to help us achieve our goal in 12 months based on 90-day increments and rocks that are attached to those 90-day milestones, okay? So, strategic, it's strategic thinking to get us started on the way to actually drawing out a plan. So the mission, what we're trying to do as an end game, will determine what roles are needed, what systems must be constructed, what resources must be allocated, time and money, of course, and then what timeline is realistic. So you go, hey, I want to scale my business up to this. Well, if you want to build a $10 million business from zero in 12 months, that's not realistic. So you've got to start to think about not just the resources itself, but you also yourself. What's your capacity? How much of experience have you got? Jed and I took a business from 0 to 1.5 million in about 14 months. But Jed and I have been in the game. Between us is over 60 years worth of experience. So we don't want to settle for that. That kind of is a bit of an entry level for us. We want to sort of give the 3 to 5 a nudge, because 1 to 3 million is kind of the swamp, if you like. And we really want to get past that and get into the 3 million plus zone. Builders often skip the step around clarifying the end goal or the mission objective, which will result in overwhelm, inefficiency, and poor profitability. Because then you go back to running a business that's fully, immersed in chaos, because the byproduct of disorder is chaos, because there's no order. You've not got order. Comes about when you know where you're going and you choose your next action or activity based on the end result. If you're not doing that, you're just driving your truck down the road with a blindfold on. You've got no clue. Right. When we talk about a general contractor task force, the system, this would be a bit of a high-level introduction, right? So it's going to break your company, and I've got this kind of mapped out here a little bit just to sort of help give you a bit of an idea. So it breaks your company down into what we'd say intake and intelligence. Intelligence. Right? The next one there is going to be your design and estimating, which involves quoting, all that sort of stuff. It's all really in the pre-construction sales process. Operations and deployment, or operations and execution, which is kind of delivery. Whoops, okay. And then the last one there is, your admin and finance. So running your office, how do you do that? So, if we were sitting down in the what do they call that? The room. What's the room called? I can't remember off the top of not the emergency room. You'll come to me in a minute. But, we'd be sitting down there understanding what it is that each of these aspects, the intake and intelligence, what do they do? Design and estimating, operations. Who are the humans that we need? What are the systems that we need? Each division has a role, responsibility, and an expected output. Okay? We don't pay people just to show up, do we, folks? We don't. We expect them to... the war room, I think that's what it was called. We expect them to deliver something to help, on a micro level, to help us deliver, overarching to achieve the mission, okay? So, a lot of that is around systems and SOPs, and we'll talk a bit about that in a minute. And it eliminates the confusion and increases accountability, which reduces the finger pointing when something doesn't go wrong. See, we need to be right from the top. If you're the boss man, boss gal, lady boss, whatever, you've got to have the ability. You expect your people to cop it in the mouth and go, yep, I made a mistake there. This is why. This is what I intend to do next time we go around. I won't do that. Great. At the same time, we're out in front probably making the most mistakes. Because when we're talking about education and implementation, in the implementation, maybe we didn't grasp the education accurately and maybe we made a cock up. See, and it takes a high level of confidence with no ego, with a high level of humility, mix the humility and the confidence together to make a leader that can accept the fact that, well, I got some education, but I didn't execute at the highest level. but I'm okay. I'll just, when I circle back and I try that again, or I do that next time, I'll get it this time. You know, that's the kind of leader that I'd want to follow, because I don't disrespect that person because they made a mistake. My respect for them grows because they, with a level of humility, said, I cocked that up, but this is what I could have done better. This is what I didn't do. I forgot about this. Next time I go around, I'll get it. And I would have more respect for that individual than somebody, and this drives me nuts, that postures and makes excuses and blames third parties. That is insecurity being covered by ego, and it's offensive to me, and it makes me throw up in my mouth. Okay, just a side note, rant over. I just do a lot of recruitment. I work with a lot of people. It's pretty much all I do, other than tap away on the keyboard and send quotes and things. But, you know, a lot of my life revolves around humans. Right. And then, right. So we don't want any finger pointing. That's not what we want. Right. So a lot of this design, this is another note. This is your pre-construction. Okay. It's a lot around what we do there. Right. The next thing is your organizational planning from the task force model. So this is what we want to map out. Who does what, how information flows, where the handoffs or handovers occur. So if there was an overlap, this has really got to do with your org chart. And I think as guys and gals, my clients, they get beyond the elementary level and they start getting into secondary. Really, the secondary is about where they start to really be strategic in their organizational plan and where they're recruiting well at the highest level. Because when you start moving into the tertiary aspect of business operation and development, it's actually where you start to become the true leader, the thoroughbred leader, and borderline the coach of people within your business. Remember, we want to control more, but do less. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, but at the end of the day, when we are able to control, that's because we're systemized and we've got good people. That is going to give us some level of leverage, and leverage will give you the balance of time and money. Who is responsible for outcomes? That's important. When you've got those little boxes ticked, it makes recruitment simpler. So what you're hiring for is a division. You're not for chaos. You don't go, right, I want you to come in and fix my business. No. I've got a specific reason for getting you to come onto my team. I define what it is that you are to do. I have created systems around what you're to do. Therein lies accountability measures. This is what I want you to do. This is what I expect. We're going to map it out. If this doesn't happen, this is the output I expect. If that doesn't happen, we do a debrief and figure out what's going on. We essentially do a performance review. Even when we play gigs, I like to do a debrief. What's the good, the bad, the ugly? What did we do well? What went sideways? We had an instance where I was playing with a band and the drummer was not really, he was very tentative and he was kind of, it just didn't sound like he was fully into it. And I'm driving home and I realized that he didn't have a monitor to be able to hear the vocals and the bass and even the guitar. So he was trying to hear what was going on because he didn't have the equipment, right? So it's important that we make sure that everyone has got the equipment or the systems to do their job. Otherwise, you're going to recruit people into this pool of chaos, and all it's going to do is cost you money and frustrate the life out of you. Not cool. It makes training easier when we're recruiting for a division, right? SOPs will help you follow the task force structure. If you want, systems are tricky to think about, but they're pretty basic once they're done. And I just know that builders have had a hard time. Even my clients have said, this is how you build a system. You have a starting point, an ending point, and you've got, what happens now, to work out the number of steps that's required to build that SOP, where sometimes in the middle of that, the client's got to make a decision. They could go left or right. That kind of changes. That then there's a level of complexity that comes in because now you've got to run two different routes, two different options. And that's why system development is so tricky. But I have put together over 400 SOPs, which are in the cloud, there's something that I can sell to you if you're interested in doing that. If you say, just give me 400 systems across 9 departments within my business, and that will get you started. And I've had clients that have taken those and they've got full access to it as EBA clients. And, they've got the ability to grab those, print them out, take them onto a job site, mark them on hard copy if that's what you want to do. Or sometimes they do it digitally, and that's, a little bit more convenient. But having those SOPs makes training your folks a lot easier because you've got structure. Right, creates accountability. We talked about that. So no task that we've got set out is just kind of floating around in space. It's really something that if there's something that needs doing, or even something that needs following up, someone might have executed that, but it didn't get handed off to somebody to follow up to make sure that it gets completed. Well, that means that there's a gap in the traffic. There's a gap in our process. We do a root cause analysis as to why that happened. We figure out a solution or remedy, and we close that gap so it doesn't happen again. Right, strategic planning using this framework. We want to begin with the mission in mind. So we want to reverse engineer. We want to design the path to that end goal backwards. And that's what's going to help us, because it's like, okay, so this is the end goal. Right, what happened in the moment before that? And then what happened in the moment before that? And before you know it, you're back to where you are today because you've deconstructed the mechanism. And then all you've got to do now that you've got that plan mapped out, all you've got to do is start to execute. Stress test your ability to scale each division. Okay, so can you process more leads? If you said, well, Max, I just need more leads. Well, if I gave you 15 leads today, what do you do next? What then? What now? So that's super important that you consider that. How do you build estimates faster? And I really want to, the caveat with this next comment is that you can use AI to do estimates, but you've got to have you cannot just trust it blindly. I'll put it to you that way. But I've got lots of checks and balances when I use AI to ensure that on the back end, I'm getting a number that I can rely on. Because unfortunately, subcontractors, boy, I've put out mega numbers of bid requests to lots of different trades, and you just get no communication, no follow-up, no nothing. And it just blows my mind. It's like, well, they must have too much work. No, they don't. They're just like, they want it, but they're so overwhelmed with the existing demand, they're not developing their business. The business is driving them. So the tail's wagging the dog in their life. Can you build more jobs? Well, how is your delivery system? Have you got the mechanism, the network of tradespeople? Have you got that third-party task force that can handle that? These are the things you've got to think about. This is why when we talk about stress testing the business, you go, well, what if you got a job like I did? Well, okay, it's a 7-figure contract. You got to pull the roof off, go put a second story up. Like there's so much in that project, even pre-construction, let alone getting into construction and having to coordinate. You just better understand that, can you build more jobs? You got to understand your limits and push your limits a little bit. Don't push them too much because you'll burn yourself out. And then can your admin keep up? Now, I'm not saying you've got an office and you've got admin. You are your admin and you are your office. Can you keep up? Can you keep the back costing happening? Can you keep the accounts payable done? Can you chase the accounts receivable in time? Do you not forget about invoices that are out there? How do you do that? Have you got a software program where you could look at the list and go outstanding payments or a waiting payment like I've got in Xero? Those sorts of things. You've got to understand that there's got to be, you can't just execute. What I find in my building company is there's things that I do today that I then got to circle back and follow up. Because odds on is if I leave it to that guy, he'll drop the ball and then it affects my business negatively. Right. I think the ultimate question too for you as a business operator is, how do you handle stress? And all stress is more weight on top of you. Right? How do you handle that? You've got to ask yourself that question, because if you get into this and realize you don't enjoy the pressure, then, I'm not saying that there's times in my life where I'm like, I hate this. There is. So what I automatically do is I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I just want to be able to go, right, I'm not really comfortable carrying this much weight. What do I jettison to enable me to function at a level that's acceptable with the weight on my back that's acceptable? Okay, simple as that. Conclusion. Why this matters for you guys as builders and general contractors. Because most of the time GCs and builders are running on instinct and not organisation. So they say, well, I have an organisation. Well, it's really a disorganisation, not an organisation. If you run it that way, and that's your modus operandi, that's how you operate, what that's going to do is lead to fatigue and burnout, and you don't want that. So when we start using or thinking about the task force model that military, first responders, law enforcement use, this is what it brings to your life. It brings structure, it brings clarity, it brings speed, it brings accountability, and it brings consistency. This will help you build a real company, not just a job. Like, we've all got to rock up and do our part. We get that. But what we don't want is just where we're trading our time for dollars and we're not actually building something significant. We're not actually scaling up. So really, when we're talking about, let's compare chaos to task force. Let's compare those two models. Remember, most builders operate in chaos because they haven't got anything mapped out. It's like everyone does everything and it's just a mishmash of roles and responsibilities, and there's no accountability or very little. There's no delegation. There's constant confusion, and the owner is just stressed off their eyeballs in perpetuity because there's just no solution to the disorganization. Whereas on the task force side, we've got clear divisions, who runs what, so clear responsibilities. We've got coordinated execution, and we've got shared accountability. And, as we build our own building company here in Vernon in British Columbia, it's exciting just to see the development of not just the business, but also of the humans within the business. And that really does, those people that are within our business that help us work, inside of that task force, they're empowered by mission, not by the paycheck alone. So really, what we want to focus on is clarity, coordination, and accountability for you personally, for me personally, but also for people within your business. If you want to get with me on Zoom and have a complimentary coaching session where we talk a little bit about strategic planning for 30 minutes, get across to elitebusinessadvisory.com, hit the book a consultation button. You'll get 30 minutes with me, no strings attached. If you want to email me something, max@elitebusinessadvisory.com, super easy. Like and subscribe, get across to Business for Builders VIP on Facebook. If you answer the 3 questions and you're a good sort, I'll let you in. Other than that, have a great day. Go build a kick-ass business. See you on the next episode. Cheers.